Jack Monroe had always been a man of the mountains. His life had been spent beneath wide-open skies, with the scent of pine in the air, and the sound of his boots crunching against the earth. For Jack, there was something about the mountains that felt like home. They had been his refuge ever since he could remember, an escape from everything he had left behind. The world he used to know felt like a distant memory, and in the solitude of the wilderness, he found peace. It had been years since Jack had last thought about the people and places that used to make up his life. He had spent countless days on the road, crossing dusty trails, and staring at horizons that seemed to go on forever. There was no room for anything permanent in his world. He liked it that way. Relationships, commitments, feelings, these were things that weighed him down, so he kept his distance from them. He had learned long ago that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was just easier to keep moving, to keep things simple. The cabin he had rented in the woods wasn't much, but it was exactly what he needed. Small and rustic, it sat on the edge of a clearing, with a view of the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending its warmth across the room, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. The nights were cold this time of year, and Jack appreciated the comfort of being inside, away from the bite of the mountain winds. He had come here to get some rest, to clear his mind, and to be alone with his thoughts. But as Jack sat back in the creaky armchair by the fire, there was a quiet restlessness in him, a nagging feeling he couldn't quite shake. He had been alone for so long that it almost felt unnatural to be in a place like this, surrounded by silence and solitude. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed louder than usual, and the crackling of the fire only served to remind him that something was missing. He had grown used to the silence, but today, it felt almost oppressive. The weight of it pressed down on him, and he couldn't help but wonder if this was all he would ever know. Endless quiet, endless solitude. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. Jack's head snapped up. He wasn't expecting anyone. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the trails around here were seldom used. It was rare for anyone to venture this far into the mountains. Slowly, he rose from the chair, instinctively reaching for the rifle, leaning against the wall. But as the footsteps grew louder, he realized that there was no danger. Whoever it was didn't sound like a threat. Still, his curiosity piqued. Jack moved cautiously toward the door, his boots making no sound against the wooden floor. He opened the door just enough to peek outside, and there she was. Lena Winters. She stood in the fading light of the afternoon, her silhouette framed by the setting sun. Her auburn hair caught the golden glow, and her eyes, though distant, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Jack blinked, not sure if he was seeing things. The last time he had seen Lena, she had been walking away from him back then. The world had been different. He hadn't expected her to ever cross his path again. But here she was. "Jack," she said softly, her voice carrying over the wind. Her smile was small but knowing, like she'd been expecting this moment. "I thought you might be here." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't seen Lena in years. She was always a mystery to him, strong, independent, and fiercely free-spirited. She didn't fit into the world that Jack knew, the world of ranches and cattle, hard work and quiet nights. She was different. When they had met, she had been like a whirlwind in his life. Everything about her was unpredictable. She had challenged him, made him feel things he wasn't sure he was ready for. But that was the past. Or so he thought. "What are you doing here?" Jack asked, his voice low, a bit wary. He was unsure whether he should be happy to see her or if he should send her on her way. The last thing he needed right now was complications, especially from someone like Lena. Lena didn't seem fazed by his question. Instead, she walked toward the cabin, her boots crunching the snow beneath her feet. "I've been looking for you," she said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Jack couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "Looking for me?" he repeated, confused. "Yeah," she replied with a half-smile. "I've got some things I need to say. Some things I need to fix. I thought you might be here. And I was right." Jack stared at her, still processing the words. Lena had always been unpredictable, but this felt different. There was a seriousness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. It made him wonder what had brought her here. After all, it wasn't every day that someone from your past showed up at your door after years of silence. "I wasn't expecting visitors," Jack said, stepping aside to let her in. His voice was neutral, though his heart beat a little faster. There was something about Lena that always made him feel on edge. She had a way of unsettling him, and even now, after all this time, she still had that effect. Lena nodded as she entered the cabin, her eyes scanning the room with a mix of curiosity and nostalgia. The simple, rustic charm of the cabin seemed to draw her in, but it was clear that her mind was elsewhere. She was here for a reason. Jack could sense that much. "You still like your space," Lena said, glancing around. Not much has changed. Jack didn't know how to respond. Was she commenting on the cabin? Or was she talking about him? She had always been able to read him, even when he thought he was hiding his true feelings. "I prefer it that way," Jack muttered, though he wasn't sure if he meant the cabin or his life. Lena didn't push the point. Instead, she looked at him, her gaze direct. "We need to talk, Jack." The words hung in the air between them, charged with an unspoken tension. Jack had no idea what this conversation would bring, but he had a feeling it wasn't going to be easy. The past had a way of catching up to you when you least expected it, and he knew that whatever was about to unfold would make him face things he had been running from for far too long. The fire crackled behind them, but neither of them seemed to notice the warmth. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt the weight of the past creeping back into his life, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. But Lena was here now, and that meant there was no turning back. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the cabin, its light casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence between Jack and Lena was thick and heavy, like the moment before a storm. Jack could feel it, the tension that had settled in the room. It wasn't just the quiet. It was something deeper. Something that neither of them could ignore. Lena was back, and she hadn't come here for a casual visit. Jack could sense that. Lena stood by the fire, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her gaze far away. She seemed to be taking in the cabin. The way everything was arranged, simple, like the rest of his life. Nothing unnecessary. She hadn't said much since entering, and Jack wasn't sure if that made him more nervous or more curious. There was something about her now that was different, something more serious in the way she carried herself. The woman who had once been a whirlwind, full of jokes and playful challenges, seemed quieter, almost distant. Jack didn't know what to make of it. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "You're here, but you still haven't told me why," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though it cracked slightly with uncertainty. He wasn't used to this. Wasn't used to having anyone stand in front of him with such quiet intensity. He was used to the company of cows and horses, the rumbling of the earth beneath his boots. Not the weight of a conversation he didn't know how to have. Lena turned toward him slowly, her eyes locking with his. The look in her eyes was unreadable, like a book with pages that couldn't be turned. For a moment, Jack thought he saw something in her, something that reminded him of the woman he used to know. But it was quickly gone, replaced by something more complex, something deeper. "I didn't think you'd want me to show up like this," she said, her voice steady but laced with a hint of vulnerability. "But I've been carrying something around for a long time, Jack. Something I need to get off my chest." Jack's brow furrowed. He didn't know what to say to that. He hadn't expected her to speak like this. So openly, so honestly. The old Lena was always the one to deflect, to laugh things off, to keep everything light. She never let anyone too close. never allowed herself to get too real. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this side of her. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," Jack said, his voice quieter now. "You don't owe me anything." Lena smiled faintly, but it wasn't the carefree grin he remembered. There was a sadness in it, an understanding between them that seemed to stretch across the years. "I do owe you something," she replied softly. "I owe you the truth. I owe you an explanation for why I disappeared, for why I walked away when things were getting complicated." Jack's heart skipped a beat at her words. He hadn't realized it until now, but he had been waiting for this, for her to explain herself, for her to give him a reason. Back then, when she had left without a word, it had torn him apart. It wasn't just that she had left, it was the way she had done it. Like their time together hadn't mattered at all. She had walked away as if it was nothing, and he had been left behind, with no closure, no understanding. "I thought you were happy," Jack said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He wasn't sure why he said it, but it had been on his mind for so long. "I thought we were good." Lena took a deep breath, her eyes flickering to the fire before she looked back at him. "I was happy," she said, her voice soft. "But that doesn't mean I wasn't scared. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to make sense of everything that was happening between us." Jack shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He had always been the kind of person to keep his emotions hidden, to bury them deep down where they couldn't hurt him. But Lena had always made him feel things he wasn't ready to deal with. She had shown him a side of life he wasn't used to, a side where emotions were messy and complicated, and love wasn't always simple. "I don't know if I'm any better at this than I was before," Lena continued, taking a step closer to him. "But I'm not the same person I was when we first met. And I need you to understand that. I don't want to leave again without telling you what's been on my mind all this time." Jack's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever she was about to say. The past had a way of catching up to him when he least expected it, and Lena, she had always been part of that past. She had been the one to pull him in and then disappear without a trace, leaving him with nothing but questions and empty space. "I was afraid," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was afraid of how much I was starting to care about you, and I didn't know if I could handle it. You're not like anyone I've ever known, Jack. You're steady, reliable. You know what you want, and you're not afraid to fight for it." She paused, her eyes searching his face for any sign of understanding. "But I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to face what it meant to care about someone. I didn't know how to let myself feel that way. So, I left. Fine lime. The slime in clearly ready. Siblusion. Tueso. Coming the midio. Scenes types of love. I wasn't ready. 4. The confession hit Jack harder than he expected. For years, he had wondered why Lena had walked away, why she had left without a word. He had convinced himself that maybe he wasn't enough, that he had somehow failed her. But hearing her admit the fear, the uncertainty, that changed everything. It wasn't about him. It was about her, about the struggles she had faced, about the walls she had built up to protect herself from getting hurt. "I didn't know any of that," Jack said quietly, his voice hoarse. "You never said a word. You just disappeared, and I had to figure it all out on my own. Jack is, and deflet, also to know." Lena nodded slowly, her eyes filled with regret. "I know. I should have told you, Jack. I should have let you in. But I was scared. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. How to trust anyone with the things I was feeling. I thought if I just walked away, it would be easier. But it wasn't. I've carried that with me every day since." Jack stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The pain he had carried for so long was still there, but it felt different now. He didn't know if it would ever completely go away. But hearing her honesty, her openness, it made the hurt feel a little lighter, a little more bearable. "I never wanted to hurt you," Lena said, her voice cracking slightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the crackling fire, the silence thick between them. Jack wasn't sure what to say. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel as alone. Lena had come back, and she had given him something he didn't even know he needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. The quiet of the cabin was almost deafening now. Jack sat in the chair by the fire, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, but his mind was far from the warmth. The tension from the last few minutes still lingered in the room, like a thick fog that wouldn't lift. Lena's words had struck him deeper than he cared to admit. She had come here to explain herself, to share the fears and struggles that had pushed her away all those years ago. He had never imagined that her leaving had been about fear. He had always believed it was something he had done wrong. Now that he knew the truth, a part of him felt lighter, but another part of him was filled with questions he hadn't thought to ask before. Lena moved toward the window, peering out into the darkening wilderness. The last light of the evening was fading, and the mountains beyond the cabin were becoming shadows. She seemed lost in thought, as if trying to piece together something in her mind. Jack could feel the unspoken challenge in the air, the sense that whatever was about to unfold would require both of them to step into unknown territory. It wasn't just about the past anymore, it was about what would happen next. Jack didn't speak for a while. He didn't know what to say. His mind raced with thoughts, questions about why Lena had really come here, about what she wanted from him now, and about what it all meant for him. He had built his life around avoiding attachment, around keeping his distance from things that could hurt him. But Lena was different. She had always been different. And no matter how much he told himself that he was fine on his own, part of him knew that he wasn't. Finally, Lena broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Jack, I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I know you don't either. But I want to be honest with you now. I can't pretend that I don't still care about you, because I do. And I want to see if there's any chance for us, for something real, between us." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Jack's heart beat a little faster, his mind racing to catch up with what she had just said. He had always known that there had been something between them, something that neither of them had fully explored or understood. But hearing her say it out loud, admitting that she still cared, made everything feel suddenly too real. "I don't know what that means," Jack replied, his voice low and measured. He didn't know if he was trying to keep himself from getting too hopeful, or if he was just trying to avoid the pain of letting himself believe in something that might not last. "I've spent a long time keeping people at arm's length, Lena. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need." Lena turned to face him, her eyes soft but filled with understanding. "I don't need you to be anything other than yourself, Jack. I don't need you to change or become someone you're not. I just need you to be honest with me, to let me in, and I'll do the same. I'm not asking for us to pick up right where we left off. I'm asking for a chance to start over, to figure this out together." The challenge in her voice was clear. She wasn't asking him to make promises he couldn't keep, but she was asking for something more than the walls he had built around himself. She was asking for trust. And trust wasn't something Jack had been willing to give for a long time. "I've spent too long running away from things," Jack said, his voice rough as he stood up from the chair. He paced a few steps, trying to collect his thoughts. "I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I could live my life without anyone getting too close. But the truth is, I've been running from myself more than anything. I don't know if I'm ready to open up to anyone, and I don't know if I can." Lena's gaze followed him, and her voice was gentle but firm. "Jack, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything figured out. But you do have to be willing to try. You have to be willing to face the things that scare you, the things that make you feel vulnerable. That's the only way we can move forward. End of very. End of very. This is. We'll see. This is Barty. We'll see. End of very. End of very. This is Barty. End of very. End of very. The challenge in her words settled over him like a weight. She wasn't asking for him to be someone he wasn't. She was asking for him to face the things he had buried deep inside. The parts of himself he had spent years trying to ignore. Jack's instinct was to pull away, to retreat into the comfort of his solitude, where he didn't have to confront anything that made him feel exposed. But Lena was here, standing in front of him, challenging him to do the one thing he had always been afraid of. To open himself up. To trust. Again. The room felt smaller now, the fire flickering in the corner, casting long shadows on the walls. Jack's mind raced, torn between the safety of his old ways and the possibility of something new. He didn't know if he was ready for this kind of change, for the kind of risk that came with letting someone back into his heart. But as he looked at Lena, he saw something in her eyes, something that reminded him of the woman he had once known. She wasn't the same person, and neither was he. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to figure this out together. "Why did you come back, Lena?" Jack asked suddenly, his voice raw with the weight of his own uncertainty. "Why now? After all this time?" Lena looked at him for a long moment, as if considering her answer carefully. Then she stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "Because I realized something," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I realized that I've been running from the same things that scared me before. But I can't keep running. I can't keep pretending that I don't want something real. I want to know if there's still a chance for us, Jack. I want to know if we can make it work this time." Woo. Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had spent so much time convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, that he could live his life without the complications of love or connection. But standing here, with Lena so close, he wasn't so sure anymore. The fear that had held him back for so long still lingered, but it was starting to feel smaller, less overpowering. Maybe, just maybe, he could face it. Maybe he could take the first step towards something different. Something real. "I don't know what's going to happen," Jack said quietly, his voice steady but uncertain. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes. But I need you to know, I'm not perfect. I'm not the man you might want me to be." 5. Lena smiled, a small, soft smile that reached her eyes. "I don't need you to be perfect, Jack. I just need you to be you." The challenge had been set. And now, with the fire burning softly in the background and the night wrapping its arms around the cabin, both of them stood on the edge of something new, something uncertain, but filled with possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a small spark of hope. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending flickers of light across the room, but neither Jack nor Lena paid much attention to it now. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something that hung in the room like an invisible thread pulling them closer. For the first time in years, Jack felt his heart racing not from fear or uncertainty, but from the weight of something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Connection. Lena stood a few feet away from him, her posture relaxed, but Jack could sense a quiet intensity in her. She was no longer the whirlwind he had once known, the woman who had swept in and out of his life without a second thought. There was a calmness to her now, a steadiness in the way she moved, in the way she looked at him. Her eyes had changed, too. They no longer held the distance that had once made it so easy to keep her at arm's length. Now, they held something different. Understanding. Maybe even hope. Jack wasn't sure if he was ready for this, wasn't sure if he was ready to open the door to something that had been shut for so long. But as Lena stepped closer to him, the walls he had carefully built around himself seemed to crumble a little. He could feel it, a pull, a magnetic force drawing him toward her, something that made his pulse quicken and his breath catch in his throat. "I'm not asking for something easy," Lena said quietly, her voice almost lost in the soft crackling of the fire. "I'm not asking for promises or for us to be who we were before. I know things can't go back to the way they were. But I think we owe it to ourselves to try." Her words settled over him, heavy with sincerity. She wasn't asking for perfection. She wasn't asking for everything to fall into place immediately. She was asking for a chance to see if the connection they had once shared could be something real again, something worth fighting for. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't fear that made his heart race. It was the rawness of the moment. He had spent years running from connection, from emotions that made him feel vulnerable and exposed. But standing here, with Lena so close, all of that seemed so distant. There was something about her, something about this moment, that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could trust again. "I don't know how to do this," Jack admitted, his voice low and honest. "I don't know how to trust again. How to let someone in after all these years." Lena didn't speak at first. She simply stepped a little closer, her eyes soft, but unwavering. "That's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to have all the answers, Jack. You don't have to know exactly how to do this, but you have to be willing to try. We can't do this if you're still holding on to the past." Jack's chest tightened at her words. The past. It had always been there, lurking in the corners of his mind, holding him back from moving forward. He had carried the weight of his past for so long, and it had kept him isolated, kept him from trusting others. Lena's sudden appearance had opened up that door again, one he had locked shut for so long, and now, standing here with her, he realized he couldn't keep hiding from it. The past was part of him, yes, but it didn't have to define his future. He swallowed hard, taking a step toward her. His heart was still pounding. But now it felt different. It felt like the beginning of something, not the end. "I've been running from everything for so long," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "Running from people. From feelings. I thought I was better off alone. But I don't think that's true anymore. I don't think I can keep running from this." Lena's eyes softened as she took another step toward him. "You don't have to do this alone, Jack. You don't have to face everything by yourself. But you have to be willing to face it. To let someone in. That's the only way you can move forward. That's the only way we can move forward." The room seemed to shrink around them as they stood there, close enough to feel the heat of the fire, but even closer because of the tension that pulled them together. Jack's breath seemed to slow as he finally allowed himself to really look at Lena. Not as the woman from his past, but as the woman who was standing here now, asking for a chance. The thought of trusting her again, of letting himself believe in something real, was terrifying. The fear of being hurt, the fear of being vulnerable. Those feelings still lingered, just beneath the surface. But in that moment, Jack realized that the real danger was in not taking the risk, in staying locked in the comfort of his isolation. If he didn't let go of his past, if he didn't take a step towards something new, he would never know what could be. He would never know if there was a future to build, or if he would simply keep drifting through life, never really living. "I'm scared," Jack confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to let go of everything that's been holding me back." Lena reached out, gently placing her hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, grounding him in the moment. And for the first time in years, Jack felt something stir in him that he hadn't felt in so long. Hope. "It's okay to be scared," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "It's okay to not have all the answers, but you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to figure it all out by yourself." Jack's heart thudded in his chest as he looked at her. He could feel the weight of her words, the invitation to trust, to open himself up again. He had spent so much of his life avoiding this moment, avoiding the very thing that could make him feel truly alive. But as he looked into Lena's eyes, he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for, whether he knew it or not. For the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to step into the unknown. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know where this path would lead, but for once, he wasn't afraid to find out. "I don't know where this is going," Jack said, his voice steady. "But I'm willing to find out. I'm willing to try." Lena smiled. A small, soft smile that seemed to light up her whole face. "That's all I'm asking for, Jack. A chance. A chance to see if we can make this work. A chance to start over." The fire crackled behind them. But in that moment, the warmth they shared was more than enough to fill the room. The uncertainty still lingered in the air, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. The past might have shaped them, but it didn't have to define them. Together, they could face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of peace, a sense of possibility that he hadn't felt before. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe it was the start of a journey neither of them had expected but both needed. The night was deep now, the dark sky outside the cabin filled with stars, each one shining brightly in the crisp mountain air. Inside, the warmth from the fire still filled the room, but it wasn't just the fire that made the air feel alive. There was something different now between Jack and Lena, something that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Jack stood by the fire, his back to it, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He had just taken a step he never thought he would. He had let someone in. For years, he had built his life on the idea of keeping people out, of avoiding any real connection. He had convinced himself that solitude was enough, that he was better off alone. But now, standing here with Lena, he wasn't so sure. He glanced at her from across the room. Lena was sitting on the worn armchair by the window, her posture relaxed, but there was a quiet energy about her. She was different from the woman he had known all those years ago. She had changed. Yes, but so had he. He could feel it in the way they talked, in the way they shared space together now. It wasn't just about the past anymore, it was about this moment, this decision to see where things could go from here. Lena caught his gaze, and for a moment, they simply stood there, not speaking, but saying everything in their eyes. She had opened up to him, trusted him with her past, and now it was Jack's turn. He had to face the truth of his own heart, the fears and walls he had kept so carefully guarded for so long. "I've never really let anyone in before," Jack said, his voice low but clear. He turned toward her, his hands resting on the edge of the fireplace. "Not like this." Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. She had seen the walls he had built, the way he kept people at a distance, especially when it came to his feelings. But she also saw the shift in him now, the openness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that he was trying, and that was enough. "Seem happen, Reeser Lime, and he detective." "I know," Lena said softly. "But you're here now. You're talking to me. You're trying. And that's all I ever wanted, Jack. For us to face this together." Jack nodded slowly, absorbing her words. She wasn't asking for more than he could give, and that was something he appreciated. She wasn't asking him to be someone else, to change or to fit into some mold. She was asking him to be honest, to face his fears, and to take the next step, whatever it might be. And for the first time in years, Jack realized that maybe he didn't have to be afraid of what came next. He walked over to where Lena sat, and as he got closer, he could see the softness in her expression. She wasn't perfect, just like him. They had both made mistakes, had both been hurt, but now they were standing on the same ground. There was no pretending anymore. No games. Just two people who had found their way back to each other in a world that had always seemed too big, too chaotic to navigate. "You know," Jack began, his voice a little more hesitant now. "I've always been good at avoiding things. I'm good at keeping my distance. But I think I've been avoiding the wrong things." Lena looked up at him, her gaze steady. "Like what?" "Like trust. Like love," he said, his voice growing more vulnerable with each word. "I've spent so much time running from it, thinking I could live without it. But now, I see that I can't, and I don't know if I'm ready for everything, but I know that I don't want to be alone anymore." There was a long pause, and in that silence, the weight of what Jack had just said seemed to settle between them. It was raw. It was real. And it was everything Jack had been avoiding for so long. But now that he had spoken it, now that he had let it out into the open, it didn't seem so impossible. It didn't seem so scary. Lena smiled, the warmth in her eyes showing that she understood. She knew how hard it was for Jack to say those words, to open up in a way he never had before. And she was proud of him, proud of the man he was becoming, even if he didn't see it yet. "You're not alone, Jack," she said softly. "You don't have to be alone. Not anymore." Jack felt something shift inside him at her words. It wasn't just the relief of knowing that Lena was still here, still by his side. It was the realization that he didn't have to keep running from the things that scared him. He could face them, with her, and that made all the difference. He stepped closer to her, his heart beating faster now, but in a way that felt right. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet certainty that they were both standing at the edge of something new. And whatever it was worth exploring. Lena stood up as Jack reached her, and for a moment, they simply stood there, close enough to feel the warmth of the fire on their skin. Neither of them spoke, but there was no need. The air between them was filled with the unspoken understanding that had been building for days now. The connection that had always been there, but had never been fully acknowledged. Now, it was undeniable. "I don't know where this is going," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "But I want to find out. I want to see where we can go together." Lena smiled again, her eyes bright. "That's all I want, Jack. I don't need to know what the future holds. I just want to know that we're in this together, that we're willing to try." Jack reached out then, his hand finding hers, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of the past begin to lift. It wasn't gone. Not completely. But it didn't have the power to control him anymore. He had let it go, piece by piece. Until now, standing here with Lena, he felt lighter. He felt like he could finally breathe. "I think we've both been through enough to know that nothing in life is guaranteed," Jack said quietly, squeezing her hand gently. "But I do know that whatever happens, I'm not going to give up on this. On us." Lena's smile widened, and she leaned in slightly, her forehead resting against his. "Neither will I." The cabin around them seemed to fade into the background as they stood there, together, in the quiet stillness of the night. The fire burned low, the stars outside continued their silent watch. But in that moment, everything felt right. They didn't know what the future held. They didn't have all the answers. But they had each other, and that was enough. Jack had spent so many years avoiding the unknown, afraid of what might happen if he let himself trust again. But now, standing with Lena, he realized that the unknown wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. It was a chance for something new, something real. And for the first time in years, Jack was ready to step into that uncharted territory, hand in hand with the woman who had come back into his life. Not to change him, but to show him that there was more to life than running away. Together, they would face whatever came next, one step at a time. And for Jack, that was more than enough.